Welcome to Innovations in Education. I'm your host, David Adams, CEO of the Urban Assembly. And on this show, we bring guests every single episode who have made things work in public education. This show is about the innovators. This show is about the folks who are solving problems. This show is about making things work in education. Now, there's a lot of shows out there talking about what's wrong in the education systems, and those are great shows. There's some shows talking about what we're not doing well, and there's a lot to learn from those, but that's not this show. This show is going to be featuring educators who are making things work for young people and improving public education.
Thanks for listening. You're about to hear a special episode of Innovations in Education with David Adams, featuring David, Urban Assembly Chair Misha Porter, and UA scholars Hayden Corcino and Adrian Valdez, interviewing 4 mayoral candidates. We're joined live by mayoral candidates Whitney Tilson, Collin Thompson, Deirdre Levy, and Jim Walden. We conclude with a recorded statement from candidate Michael Blake. We'll pick up here with opening remarks from Misha Porter and David Adams. We hope you enjoy.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. And I want to welcome you to the Urban Assembly's first Candidates Forum. Let's give us a round of applause. Tonight is really important. Education is the, heart of our city. It is the heart of how we prepare a future society, and making a significant and important investment from the city and from our leadership is critically important. And the leadership that we're going to choose in this next election is going to shape the future for New York City public school students, and especially our beautiful Urban Assembly scholars. Education is at the heart of every conversation across this nation right now, and for a lot of different reasons. And we are really proud at the Urban Assembly that we've been a part of this conversation in New York City for over 25 years. And our work has really been around providing every student, regardless of their zip code, access to a high-quality education, but also a high-quality education that tapped into their interests and connected them before there was language around career-connected learning. It was a school to career. It was all of these things, but the Urban Assembly was doing and thinking about that work 25 years ago. And I have the unique pleasure of having been there 25 years ago. I had the honor and the privilege of being a part of the creation of the first Urban Assembly School, the Bronx School for Law, Government, and Justice. And that school grew out of a process. It grew out of a community's desire and need and want to ensure that there was a school, as this new courthouse was being built, that did not create a space where we were creating more jails for students, but actually that we were creating an opportunity for young people to learn the inner workings of the court system by being students of it, as opposed to going through the system, which was happening to so many young people in New York City. And so it is an absolute honor and pleasure today that I stand here. And I don't know if I said who I am, but I'm Dr. Misha Porter. I have to say Dr. Misha Porter because that was a lot of work, my friends. I am currently the chair of the Urban Assembly Board, and so it is my story full circle, and such an honor and a privilege to serve in that role. And so tonight we're going to hear directly from candidates, and I'm going to thank them all for committing to being here with us today. But your voice and your questions are going to be what guides this conversation.
All right, so I'm David Adams, Chief Executive Officer at the Urban Assembly, and I'm very, very pleased to be here today. I want to start by expressing my gratitude to Hunter College. For those who are not tracking right now, we are in the house that the Roosevelts built. That means something. That means something today. It meant something in 1941, and it means something for the future. The Roosevelt House has long been a cornerstone of democratic values, progressive thought, and leadership aimed at improving everyday Americans' lives. It was in these walls that Franklin and Eleanor not only envisioned a more just society, but also redefined what it means to lead with transformative innovation. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal was a groundbreaking response to the challenges of society, proving that bold policies could bring stability and opportunities to millions. Meanwhile, Eleanor Roosevelt reshaped the role of the First Lady, transforming it into a platform for human rights and social justice advocacy. Today, as we bring together New York City's mayoral candidates to share their platforms, we stand in a very place where transformative conversations about the public good have taken place. May the legacy of innovation and service emboldened and embodied by the Roosevelts inspire ideas that will shape our city's path forward, and an education system that truly advances the economic and social mobility of our young people. With that being said, I want to introduce our students here today. Join me in welcoming Hayden Corcino and Adrian Valdez from the Urban Assembly School for Applied Math and Science. All right, so before we begin, I want to call our candidates to the stage, please. We have Whitney Tilson, philanthropist, educator, and former hedge fund manager. And folks, I just want to let you know, Whitney was really about this life. He finished an interview at New York One, got on a bike, and rode in the rain across New York City so that he could be part of this conversation. So I just want to say thank you, Whitney, for your opportunity to be here today. We have Collin Thompson, former principal, dean, and teacher. We have Deirdre Levy, special education teacher and founder of NYC Filipinos. And we have Jim Walden, trial lawyer and former assistant U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of New York. Senator Ramos was not able to join us tonight, but she does send her wishes, and we will have a video from Michael Blake at the end. Tonight's format will allow each candidate to share their perspective on critical educational issues. And with that being said, folks, the Mayoral Forum for 2024 on innovation in education will begin. Innovation in public education is essential, as Dr. Porter talked about. For each of the candidates, what do you believe to be the most pressing problems to solve in public education during your term in mayor? How will you go about solving them? Starting on our left, Jim.
So my name is Jim Walden, and I just want to start by saying I'm a product of the public schools, not the public schools here, but public schools in the town that I grew up with, which is a crumbling town with a terrible education system. I was just saying to someone, if you had gone 30 years, 40 years, I guess now back, I would have been in District 75 for sure. There's no doubt in my mind that that would have happened. And so there are so many pressing problems in the New York City education system, but there's one jewel of the system, and that's teachers. And the teachers need to be honored and respected and given a seat at the table. And so as I read through a lot of materials as I was preparing for this race and learning areas that I had not really studied before, I really stuck on mayoral control. And I thought to myself, why is there such a fight from the mayor's office to control the public schools when so many of our mayors really know very little about education policy and the problems in the schools? And I read about the alternatives, and I think that the structural issue is one that is super important. And I like
the world they're going to graduate into.
Sound kind of strange, but
not
I like
the world that they're being educated in, right? They're not in the workforce yet.
Problems running
so I would
large federal agencies
incorporate that future casting.
so that there
I
was
would
a consistent
add emotional
program.
intelligence as a core subject area. There's a lot that technology can do. It cannot replicate empathy.
Because in my view,
and I
really
would want to expand vocational education so that every student
should, in some
graduates
form or
with
fashion,
some trade
subject
skill
matter
or
experts
industry certification for economic mobility, right? Either as a primary pathway
I mean, when you
or
think about
as
what happened
an
in the de
opportunity.
Blasio administration, we had 3 different chancellors. Now, in the Adams administration, we have 2. Maybe there'll be more. I don't know. But every single time there's that turnover, there is a depreciation in the integrity of the system. There are changes in curriculum, changes in programs, and what happens at the teacher level as these things are being rolled out. So I favor neither of those 2 models. I favor a model that is kind of like the FBI. There is a small board of subject matter experts, teachers, and educators who are in control of the system. And some of those people are appointed by the city council, some by the mayor, and some locally. So there is some local involvement in the board, but that board survives over the course of multiple terms, and there'll be term limits and there'll be real evaluations so that there will be accountability. But that board will be responsible for working with teachers and principals to make sure that there's consistency, to make sure that there's buy-in at the teacher level, and to make sure that mayors don't come in and say, well, my flavor of the month today is this new program that is very controversial and many teachers don't support. I think that that would be a better way to make sure that there is improvement, consistency, stability, and integrity in the system.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to be in a room full of educators, and it's great to meet some of the candidates tonight for the first time. I'm grateful to be here only because I am a product of the New York City public school system, and I was born and raised in Flushing, Queens. And I'm a current teacher, and I just rushed over here after a long day of teaching my K-2 self-contained class in Brooklyn. So I'm not giving up my spot as a teacher because I believe that true lived experience is what's going to take us into the next level if we want to make sure that we are preparing our students for the global workforce. And when it comes down to the global workforce, the most pressing issue is something that I haven't just thought of on my own. I've consulted educators across the city, my own principal, parents, different teachers, and honestly, a lot of issues are para pay. There has been an increase suggested, but the para pay isn't a living wage for New Yorkers. Another issue is like special education services. I'm a special education teacher and I started in District 75. So, as a District 75 teacher, working in almost every borough, even the Bronx, even Manhattan, actually at a high school where kids were formerly incarcerated, I've seen the lack of services that these students are not receiving. And it's troubling. It's troubling because unfortunately, teachers, they don't last within like past 5 years. And it's upsetting because I know like I almost was that teacher. And for me, like, I believe that teaching is something that you're called to do. At first, I didn't think that. But after having a disability myself and seeing how misunderstood these kids are, we deserve more. So there are so many other pressing issues, but at the end of the day, teacher retention, we do need to listen to teachers because teachers are unheard and it's not fair. But as someone who's running for mayor, I believe that consistency is important. Listening to the experts who are doing the jobs while they're doing it, not just listening to what happened 10 years ago, listening to what's happening now. It's important. Thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre. Collin.
Thank you, David. I believe that to best innovate, we need to invest in the people who innovate best, which are our teachers. And for the last 20 years, we've invested in nearly every reform there is under the sun in innovative structures and innovative systems, but not in our people. And I believe that we should raise the starting salary for teachers to mirror that of other industries that do public civil service in our city. I can speak from personal example. My partner, who is here with me tonight, is a nurse, a trauma ICU nurse at our city's public flagship hospital, Bellevue, and his starting salary was double what mine was as a public educator here in New York City. Because Health and Hospitals knows that to attract and retain good talent, they have to be competitive with Presbyterian and Lagone and other hospitals in our city. But we're not doing the same for our teachers. And so two big crises that the mayor in this next term is going to have to face, A, is the teacher retention issue. We have over 2,300 special education vacancies alone. So we're not even meeting our legal obligation to provide for students because we don't have the staff to do it. And then we're not retaining people. They're leaving the profession entirely because it takes up to, an average apartment in our city now, one bedroom is $4,200, $4,900. That could take up to 90% of the starting salary for a public school teacher in our city, right? People are leaving the profession in droves. So I would work with our comptroller, our city council, to find ways to raise that starting salary to reflect the job. And the question then always is, well, what about our money? Where are we going to fund this? Our $100 billion city budget is rife with corruption and wasteful bureaucratic spending. And budgets should reflect our priorities. And I think to invest in the people who innovate best, invest in our people, we've done that with systems and structures, and get out of their way and let teachers innovate in the classroom.
Thank you, Collin. Whitney.
Briefly, let me introduce myself. I am the child of teachers who met and married in the Peace Corps in the Philippines. When I was born, I grew up in Tanzania and Nicaragua after being born when they were both teachers in New Haven, Connecticut. So I too honor teachers like my parents. They've been educators their entire careers, mostly internationally in developing countries. My first job out of college was right here in New York City, a few blocks from here, employee number 2 at Teach for America, helping Wendy Kopp start TFA. 10 years later, she introduced me to Dave Levin at KIPP before there even was a charter law, and I got inspired by what KIPP was doing. I've been on the board there until I ran for mayor when I had to resign for obvious conflict of interest reasons, but for more than 20 years. So that's my brief background and framework. I agree that it's a structural problem. The structure of our system is terribly broken and it leads to terrible outcomes. Let me just frame how bad it is. We have a system in which almost half the fourth graders can't even read at a basic level. There's nothing more fundamental than being able to read at least a basic, if not proficient level by fourth grade. Statistically speaking, it's pretty much game over for kids who can't read by fourth grade, because if you can't read by then, the whole curriculum pivots from learning to read to reading to learn. And if you can't read by then, you're falling behind the rest of your life. You want to know where our prison population, our homeless population comes from. It's the ones who our school system failed to teach to read at a decent level. So the system is also characterized, I keep hearing at the bottom level, we're starved for resources, we're under-resourced. But I look at the top level and I wonder where all the money's going. We're spending $40 billion this year out of our $115 billion budget, by far the largest line item. On our schools, it's $43,000 a kid. Nationwide, we're spending $17,000. So it ain't a shortage of money. It's where's that money going? It is a corrupt and bloated system that is totally beholden to special interests. And let me tell you, the kids in this neighborhood aren't getting screwed. This is the wealthiest census tract in the United States. It's low-income minority kids in this city, just like across the country, who are being screwed by this system and not being given a fair shot at escaping the poverty that they were born into. That is deeply wrong, profoundly un-American, something I've been fighting against for 35 years. So you want to know the change, or one structural change I would make? Pass a law that every person in New York City, every family has to send their kid to a randomly selected public school, so that rich people have to send their kids to a randomly selected public school in this city. The system would change so damn fast it would make your head spin.
Thank you, Whitney. I'm going to turn it over now to our student moderator, Adrian Valdez, and you're going to take the next question. Adrian.
Hello again. My name is Adrian Valdez. I'm a 12th grader at UAAMS. New York City Public Schools provides free online learning resources to students. Many of these modern tools to enhance learning. How will you integrate AI into these platforms to offer personalized study and better assist students in their academic success?
Every story that you've read about AI oftentimes ends with the lawyers, because some lawyer used AI to submit a brief and relied on cases that didn't actually even exist. So I'm not one of those people that believes that AI is the devil or is some talisman. I think it was one of the Teachers Federation associations that came up with a series of guardrails as to how we can integrate and teach people to use AI as a safe tool. And so in terms of how to integrate it, I'm sorry that I'm not going to be able to give you a detailed answer, because I'm going to follow those guidelines. But this dovetails back to what I was saying before, which is I believe that one of the reasons that there were a lot of people, I'm not sure everyone in this room, that believed that Mayor Bloomberg did a very good job. He had one school's chancellor who was an excellent person who relied on a lot of subject matter expertise, and that was Joel Klein, the longest serving school's chancellor, at least as I'm aware, in the city's history. And so when it comes to AI, I think it's just super important that one of the first things that happens when we're trying to figure out how to implement those guidelines and what rules to apply across all of the schools is to have subject matter experts try to help us formulate guidelines for students about how to use things like ChatGPT in a safe way, and to do it in a transparent way so they're not submitting something that they didn't have some role in creating. So I do believe that there's a role for it, but I think it has to be a safe role.
Thank you for your question. I think based on my own lived experience, I would have to defer to what my principal would always tell us. And she would always say, like, use the resources that you already have. And what we do already have, we have school libraries or we have public libraries. And why not use those resources and fund public libraries to make sure that they can implement the services that we need to implement AI and to help students have access to those services? Because why reinvent the wheel, or why do things that we don't already know? I mean, I think that there isn't enough emphasis and there isn't enough funding for public libraries. Last year, we saw that that was a big issue. But why not? Why not just put more money into the libraries and make that as a big resource that New York City students can access? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Adrian. And I believe you touched on it when you said, as a teacher being told what to use and what not to use. I don't mean to sound cliche, Adrian, but it really boils down to some of these bureaucratic issues with our system where technology is moving incredibly fast. Every day, a new technology tool emerges that might be helpful for a teacher who has the autonomy, who had the systems and structures in place to make the decision on what to use for the students in their classroom, what's going to be best for the students in their classroom, instead of working through the bottleneck of decision-making in our current system to get approval for that. By the time we are going through our bureaucratic system to implement tech tools or curricula, they're outdated at the pace in which technology and curriculum is moving. So I think it's decentralizing key decisions like this and giving the autonomy back to teachers in the classroom to pick the tools that work best for them and make that decision in real time, what they need and when they need it.
The biggest concern I'm hearing from teachers is AI is a tool of cheating. It's super powerful. I use it. I believe high school students should be taught to use it. But I actually think certain types of technology are doing tremendous harm to students. This could be a tool of cheating. The first thing I would do as chancellor is immediately ban all cell phones in public schools. And I will fight in the state legislature to ban social media for anyone under age 16. One of the few things I agree with Governor DeSantis on and 6 other states that have passed such laws. It terrifies me that we are measuring the amount of time our children spend on social media and all forms of tech by the hours, and we spent the amount of time that they spend reading books, for example, is measured by the minutes.
So you all started talking a little bit about this, but I want to talk about structural reforms to the system and specifically mayoral control. Mayoral control has been a very sensitive issue in New York City, and especially for parent leaders who have been essentially boxed out of the conversation, along with teachers, when we think about the levels and leading our system. And so critics of mayoral control have complained that the lack of consistency in leadership makes it hard for educators to invest in initiatives coming from the central office. What is your position on mayoral control of schools, and what aspects would you keep or would you change? And because I'm a teacher, I'm going to mix things up, and we're going to start with Deirdre.
Well, as a teacher, I'm used to being able to adapt because that's my job, especially with special education students. So working with kids with autism, ADHD, emotional disabilities, speech impairment, the list goes on. I've worked with everything, worked with every level. I'm used to it. So thank you for giving me that opportunity. But when it comes to mayoral control, and I've experienced it because when I was in high school in 2002, I think that's when Bloomberg said that my high school was the second worst in the city. And it really wasn't. It was a great school. I was vice president of my student union. I did a lot. I went to Amsterdam because I was afforded that opportunity. And I'm grateful for my experience. And I wish that more New York City public school students can have that experience. But unfortunately, what we have seen when it comes to mayoral control is the lack of inconsistency. And we saw it in this last administration because when it came down to it, we saw 2 chancellors within 1 term. And I do love the fact that there is a strong emphasis and shift on reading, especially for my students, because my students benefit from multisensory learning. But I think that we need consistency and we need to hear it from educators. And as someone who is an educator, I think that we have to give that control to our educators. So thank you.
Well, we're in the FDR room. And when our country was in crisis, FDR didn't tinker around the edges. He did complete structural overhauls of our systems to reinvent the wheel because it needed it by that point. And we have been in a process of putting Band-Aids on big structural issues. And we need to rethink these structures if we want different outcomes. And I would propose moving away from mayoral control almost entirely. Put the decisions back into the districts, whether that be an elected school board within the district that can hire superintendents based on competencies and what's needed for that district, and go from there. This one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. I mean, what's needed in the South Bronx isn't necessarily what's needed in Staten Island. Even Albany understands this, right? I mean, the state doesn't dictate to all 60-something counties in the state of New York what to do at the local level. And although we are a city, we are 38th in terms of population if we were a state, right? So we have a very large city, a very diverse city, decentralizing that in tandem with an oversight board to make sure that there's not corruption or political appointments that aren't meeting the merits of that position. But it goes back to some of the conversations we've had earlier about disseminating decision-making to local leaders in that community who can make the decisions that are best for the communities that those districts are serving.
I'm a strong advocate of mayoral control, not because I think it's perfect, but because it's a heck of a lot better than what existed prior and what would come if it didn't exist. The system, actually, as bad as it is exactly what I would tell you to expect and what we should expect given the political inefficiency that exists, which is the people that it is serving don't vote. And the parents are generally not well organized and aren't writing big checks. It is a political system is controlled by politicians. It is by far the biggest line item in the budget, $40 billion, 150,000 people in the system. That's half of all city employees are in this system. And the adults in the system, not just teachers unions, but the principals union, the custodial union, et cetera, are super well organized. They are by far the most politically powerful force in this city. And they run that system for the benefit of adults. And the only opportunity, the only chance kids have is to get a strong mayor like Mike Bloomberg and a chancellor like Joel Klein in there who will do battle on behalf of kids and who aren't owned by the special interests that screw up this system.
Can I break with the format for 1 second? I'm sorry, something gets in my head and can I just have a show of hands? How many people in this audience are in favor of banning cell phones in schools? Maybe a third, maybe a quarter? And how many people are against using AI in the classroom as a tool? Okay, now I'm going to get to the question because I already answered the question already. So growing up as I did, I didn't really know what it meant to be great. But I remember early in my career, I had a mentor who was an older white man, and he told me about the great man theory. The great man theory posits that all good things, all great things are done by men. And who said that? A man and a white man, right? I don't believe that the answer to our public school lies in elected officials because I am a deep skeptic of our political system and the quality of candidates that it turns out. And we have seen some wonderful mayors that were good at some things, but those same mayors weren't good at other things. And we've seen other mayors that seem terrible about almost everything, including the guy that's sitting there now. So I don't believe that mayoral control is some talisman, but at the same time, I grew up in a system that had a school board where there was rampant patronage and corruption. And so I believe it's a bit of a false choice. And I think that thinking out of the box, what we really need to improve the quality of our public school and our outcomes for kids is a professional board that has long terms and minimum criteria that includes public teaching experience. And if we had an apolitical board where there was appointments and a bit of democracy to make sure that local communities were heard and local communities had a seat at the table, but those same people that were elected by the local communities, maybe through the city council, also had minimum criteria in terms of their experience level. How many years did they teach? Did they teach in public schools? Do they have advanced degrees? How much education policy training did they have? Did they hold other positions? Like, there are criteria of elder statesmen and women of all walks of life that would be great for a professionalized board of managers that has the professional experience and acronym and removal from the political system, answerable to teachers and parents, accountable, including by removal if there is cause. There will be a better guide than the next mayor, even if it's me.
Thank you so much. We're having this conversation. I just want to elevate this idea of mayoral control, of the role of education in the mayor's race. When we bring these topics up to conversation and to the forefront, we ensure that education and the conversation about public education in New York City is the topic to talk about when we talk about the next mayor of New York City. So even if mayoral control is not your end state from some of the candidates here, or it is on some other candidates, the fact that we're having this conversation allows us to really start to interrogate what that means and what it'll mean for the future. So that being said, I'm going to move over here from structural conversations, and I'm going to talk about the portrait of the graduate. We have the Blue Ribbon Commission over in the New York State and the Board of Regents, and the Blue Ribbon Commission has made some recommendations to graduation requirements here in New York City, as well as across New York State. That Blue Ribbon Commission has included things like social emotional competence, included things like financial learning, also included things like career readiness. I'm going to turn it over to Hayden Corcino, and she is going to talk about her vision for an education when she graduates and what she's experienced in New York City public schools as a student at Urban Assembly Academy for Math and Science.
Hello, I'm Hayden. I'm a senior at the Urban Assembly School for Applied Math and Science, and one question that I constantly hear my classmates asking throughout my student life is, how will any of this help me in real life? Many students graduate high school without practical skills that are necessary after high school, like emotional intelligence, financial literacy, or effective communication. My question to you is, how will you ensure that New York City schools include classes that focus on these skills to better prepare students for their life after graduation?
I guess first I'd start before I totally agree with what you're saying about financial literacy and other things. I would tell you, though, my biggest concern is that New York City is claiming that it has an 83% high school graduation rate. but half of those kids are not ready to do college level work. If you think about it, if 48% of kids in the NAEP test that were released 2 days ago in fourth grade are not even reading at a basic level. And by the way, if you look under Bloomberg, that number was as high as 57. Under Bloomberg and Klein, it went down to 38%. Keep in mind, fourth grade reading is the single most important metric of a kid's, not just educational outcome, but life outcome. So after Bloomberg and Klein left, and under the last two mayors, it has gone from 38% back up to 48%. So those are the trends and what happens when you have a good mayor under mayor control with a good chancellor, and then what happens when you get two mayors like the last two. So what happened if half the kids can't even read a grade level in fourth grade and all of a sudden, 83% are graduating high school? What's happening is kids are being passed along and the system just passes kids through and is still failing to educate them. So the first thing I would do is focus on the half the kids who we're graduating and lying to. We're lying to the parents, we're lying to the kids that, yeah, you've got your high school diploma, congratulations, and most of them think they're ready to do college level work, and then they show up to college and then they realize the truth, and they generally drop out. So that would be my primary focus.
We are in a state where, given some of the other issues that we've all already discussed, are in a state of reactivity, not proactivity. I had the opportunity to work on a team that supported the American School in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, on future casting, what the industries and economy would need 10 years from now. The Saudi government has Vision 2030 to diversify its economy and rely less on oil because they see the trends happening in the world and we're shifting away from fossil fuels. Maybe not the rate we should be, but we're headed in that direction. And they are preparing for the future. So the American School asked us to take those trends, the goals set by the Saudi government, and then give recommendations for tweaks on curriculum or skills and competencies needed so that their students, when they're graduating, are ready for 2030, 2033, 2034. And I believe that that is something we don't do enough of. So I would incorporate a commission that would look at what are the trends in the economy, what is going to be needed 5 years, 10 years from now, so that we're preparing students for that now, not what the industry is currently needing, knowing how things are moving, how fast technological advances are happening, but to prepare them for the world they're going to graduate into, not the world that they're being educated in, right? They're not in the workforce yet. So I would incorporate that, future casting. I would add emotional intelligence as a core subject area. There's a lot that technology can do. It cannot replicate empathy. And I would want to expand vocational education so that every student graduates with some trade skill or industry certification for economic mobility, right? Either as a primary pathway or as an opportunity should they need it in their life.
Thank you for your question and thank you for your response. When it comes down to what students need to be prepared for, that's the reason why I changed. And when I first got my master's program at SUNY Albany, which is the only time I left New York City, but still stayed in New York, I took a comparative education course and looked at the different countries that were outperforming the United States. And that's why I became a City Year New York AmeriCorps volunteer right after my first master's program. And then after that, I decided, I don't want to be a hypocrite and go into policy and not have teaching experience because, frankly, a lot of our policymakers or our electeds don't have that experience and they can't really deliver on what it means to actually know what's going on in the classroom. So when it comes down to it, the United States doesn't place enough emphasis on international assessments. We have Whitney who mentioned NAEP, but did we mention Program for International Student Assessment that is rarely talked about in the United States, let alone New York? We don't. And with that assessment, it assesses whether 15-year-olds are prepared in this global workforce. So to answer your question, I think that it is important and we need to look at what other countries are doing well. We have other countries that place a great emphasis on vocational programs and remove that stigma. And unfortunately, we have that stigma in New York and in the United States. But electricians sometimes get paid more than teachers. And why not be excited about that? Because there are so many different talents that we have in New York. Why not showcase those talents that we have mentioned recently?
So your question was, how would we integrate these kind of innovative ways of looking at education, including financial planning, emotional intelligence, when it comes to understanding ourselves, emotional intelligence when it comes to understanding other people that we're interacting with, dealing with systematic racism. Like, how would we incorporate that into the school curriculum across the system?
Yes, that's
Okay.
good math.
So in terms of the how, I think that we have to take steps in the right direction. And the first thing that a lot of schools are crying for is more after school programs. And I think that that is a real opportunity to take the kids and help them understand what I did not understand as a kid. If you had talked to me 40 years ago and said, you need emotional intelligence, I would have looked at you like you had two heads. What does that even mean? Right? So it's great that we can have this conversation, but emotional intelligence isn't just understanding the other people around you, it's understanding yourself. And then there are more technical things like financial planning and life planning and how one goes about careers and how one deals with obstacles and what it means to have grit, right? What it means to have grit is an incredibly important thing that is adjacent to all these topics. And so if we extend after school programs, but include in the curriculum, whether it's in homeroom or other points during the day, education for people as to why these programs are important and why they should choose them. I really believe that with these programs, it's a lot easier to start with the people that can understand why they're important and want them, and then have that message spread to a larger body. So in terms of the how, that's how I would do it now that you're asking me. But the other thing that I would do, goes back to what I've been saying all along is, do you think, all of you, having met me for 20 minutes, that I know better than you? I don't, right? So one of the things that I want to do differently as mayor, should I get that opportunity, is really to listen to you as well. And you may have your own ideas, including you, Hayden, about how best to integrate those programs. And as part of my transition period, I already have a policy council of 70 people that's helping me form policies around all of the things that the mayor needs to do. So if there's anyone in this room that wants to help form my policies on education, you know where to find me. We have plenty of spots on the council for people that really care and know this area and want to contribute now to policy, because I'm going to win. But if I don't win, I'll take those policies and give them to the winner so that we all benefit one way or the other.
Thank you. And still on the topic of what a portrait of a graduate is, I'd like to turn the next question back to Adrian.
Hello again. My question is, what initiatives are you considering to increase vocational training, technical education, and life skills classes in our schools so that students who may not pursue college have paths to meaningful careers and success?
I agree with you that it's critically important. Interestingly, my sister married a German guy, so my nephew's half German and was considering college. He ended up at RPI here in New York State. I was glad to see, but he looked closely at the German system, as did I. And about 40% of Germans don't go to college, yet they have a very effective system of apprenticeships and skills training, so that actually a nephew from my former brother-in-law, who is in Germany, got specialized training to make like handmade crafted guns that gun collectors love, right? But it's highly skilled. You know, Germany's famous for its high skilled manufacturing, needs a high skilled workforce for that. So we need to do a lot more of that, because we can look at the numbers. You know, even our KIPP schools, which are located in neighborhoods in which the likelihood of a kid from that neighborhood finishing college, earning a 4-year degree is 9%. Our schools, the parents who opt into our schools, have somewhere around a 65% chance of going to graduating from a 4-year college. But even then, you still have 35% of our KIPsters that we have to look out for. And so it's critical to have training programs so that they can get specialized skills and earn, in a lot of these professions, you can earn a very solid middle-class existence if you get the proper training and get into these apprenticeship programs.
I touched on this just a moment ago in my answer, but I think in addition to the things that I'd already mentioned about adding emotional intelligence as a core subject area, doing future casting to predict trends and tweak curriculum or elective offers to make sure that we're preparing students for the economy that they're going to walk into, making sure that they have a trade skill to come out of high school with for economic mobility. It would be expanding on some of the great work that the Urban Assembly already does and take that across our public schools to offer extended apprenticeships, school to job pathways, preparing students in school to have that option coming right out of school, adding in those financial literacy conversations that we've already been talking about, and ensuring that the students who are maybe not going to have the support and structures upon graduation that they would have in our schools are prepared, knowing that when they walk off that graduation stage, they're ready to integrate into society holistically, right? From skills, from emotional intelligence, from a trade that they can take to the economy, whether they go to college or not. And I applaud the Urban Assembly for the work that they already do around this. I would like to expand that across all of our public schools to ensure that all students have that opportunity to come out and have something to look forward to it and are prepared to use it.
I think it's so important to make sure that our students are prepared to enter the workforce. From my own perspective, I have only been a special education teacher, so I worry about the future of my students and what it's going to look like even after they graduate from the system. And sometimes students graduate after they're 21 or 22, maybe even later. But for my students, it's very scary because they're the most vulnerable populations. And I'm not sure if anyone really knows what alternate assessment is, but what about the opportunities? We talk about like the opportunities for all New Yorkers. And yes, I think that's great. We need to make sure that all New Yorkers are prepared to enter the workforce. But what about the kids with special needs that can't meet those assessments, that they're not able to, like, it's not a fair assessment for their skill level because they have a lot of skills, but what about those students and what about the opportunities for those students when they age out of the system? Because frankly, I'm scared. I'm nervous about what's going to happen to them, but I could be nervous, but I'm going to do something about it. And when it comes to the successes that I've seen in District 75, there are occupational training centers, one in which I started at, which wasn't far from where my mom worked in the Bronx at Calvary Hospital, but at an OTC by Eastchester Road. And I thought that the skills that they were teaching the students, whether it was cooking, whether it was sewing, even another school I started at Manhattan High School, I saw that students were focused on automotive skills or beauty skills. And there are just so many great skills that I feel like our society undervalues, but they're all valuable. And I think that we need to change the stigma that we see in these skills because everything holds value. Thank you.
So I feel like you totally just stole my thunder. I was going to lead with the stigma point, so I congratulate you for that. Listen, where I went to school, there was only 10% of my high school that went to college at all, and a significant percentage of those people went to community college. And there was no shame in that. And a significant number of people went to technical high schools, and their academic criteria kind of ended. And when we say that now in the city of New York, suddenly, this goes to your point that there's a stigma around it. And it's not just that you can have a trade and live a comfortable middle-class life. That's not actually the limit of people that go into the trades. I've got a really good friend named Joe Venuti that was an electrician, and he started a contracting business, and now he makes more money than almost all of the lawyers that I know, and he's got a boat. Right? And I don't, trust me. So, Adrian, I don't come from a world in which there's stigma around this at all. And when I came to New York in its hoity-toity ways, it always surprises me that this is such a difficult conversation. Literally, where I went to high school, we had shop, right? You could go in and make, and learn woodworking or learn plumbing or learn electrical skills. And there was nothing wrong with going into a union job or starting your own job. So I agree with everyone that it's not practical to have all of those located in schools the way they were in every public school where I grew up. But apprenticeships are a good job, but I agree with you 100%. Let's take the stigma out of it because we need people to do those jobs. Those are valuable jobs. We rely on them. And when we take the stigma out of it and we encourage those people that want to do it, they will imagine a future where it's not just carving out some middle class or lower middle class existence. They will dream big too, and they can do big things even from a vocational skills perspective, Adrian.
Thank you for your answers. I'd like to turn it back to Hayden to close this topic off.
New York City has for a long time led the way in ensuring a diverse curriculum that reflects its diverse city. There is an attack on the idea of a representative curriculum at the national level. My question is, how will you ensure that New York City's efforts to reflect its student body in its teaching and learning continue?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but I'm going to answer it this way, Hayden, which is I'm going to listen to teachers and I'm going to make sure that if there are federal standards that come out of this administration, and we could talk about this administration until the cows come home, that transgress our values and try to force us to adopt curricula that is not consistent with our values of diversity, which are extraordinarily important. And having grown up in the area, even though I'm white, growing up in the area that I grew up in where there was a high degree of segregation and a high degree of class warfare. And I never want to see those days again. And so having diversity in our curriculum, having balance, not having the federal government, whether it is an extreme right wing or a left wing, tell us how to teach at the local level is not something that I will ever be comfortable with. And thank God I'm a litigator, because if that happens, what I'm going to do is go to court to ensure that we are not being force-fed curriculum from Washington that conflicts with what we know is the right way to teach, or what you know is the right way to teach. So I hope that answers the question.
So I'm the proud daughter of a Filipino immigrant who came to the United States to have a better life as a nurse and worked at Calvary Hospital as a cancer care technician for over 35 years. And I'm also the granddaughter of Jewish immigrants who escaped anti-Semitism and was also looking for a better life. So when it comes to diversity, I feel like I've always had to struggle with my own identity because I could be either more Filipino or more Jewish or maybe just lots of different things, right? But I'm also a New Yorker, and I treat being a New Yorker as a nationality. And the way that it's a nationality is because I grew up with kids who look different than me, and I love that. And at first it was really hard because I'd have things that were said to me like pale girl or whatever, but I've worked through it because in New York, you just work through it, and that's just the way New York is. But to touch on cultural responsive teaching, which I think is a huge thing, especially for me as a special educator, I have to adapt my materials to make sure I'm culturally responsive to my special education students. With the rise in anti-Asian attacks or the Asian hate attacks, I've had to bring books like this book to make sure that if I didn't have the tools in my classroom, I was going to find the tools, because that's what teachers do. We don't have things that are handed to us, just like we don't choose the kids that we teach the kids that we get. And when we do that, we have to make those relationships happen. We don't have the privilege that other schools might have. And that's the reality of New York City public schools. You need to build those relationships with every learner, regardless of race, regardless of ability. Thank you.
Hayden, I'm coming at this from the perspective of having to do this work myself and continue to do this work. I grew up in East Tennessee in a very homogenous community in an all-white public school. I'm a farm kid. I had a very different life than a lot of the students I've worked with. My first job out of college was co-founding a nonprofit in Tanzania that took HIV/AIDS prevention education into schools. So very different than Decatur, Tennessee. I then came back to the United States and served as a national teaching fellow in AmeriCorps and served in East San Jose, California, very different than Decatur, Tennessee. And then I came to New York City and taught history of all subjects in the South Bronx, very different than Decatur, Tennessee. And I was a white man teaching history to students who had completely opposite backgrounds to myself, racially, economically, socially, all of those categories and those determinants. And I have had to do a lot of work myself, a lot of implicit work that just growing up where I grew up and in the community I grew up in, that wasn't explicit biases I had, I'd like to think at least, but implicit just from the communities I grew up in and the areas I was in. And AmeriCorps didn't train me to do that. And frankly, our schools didn't either, right? That's just work that I've had to take on myself because of something I care about. And I'm not trying to sit on a moral high horse here. My point being that we need to ensure that people like me, who have had a very specific upbringing, who are going into communities to serve in organizations like AmeriCorps in our schools in the South Bronx, are provided with the training they need to ensure that they have the emotional competencies around supporting students who are different than them, A. And B, we need to, specifically as a mayor, to set the tone, right? To your point and your question at the national level, the term DEI has become a weapon, political weapon, right? And it's now lost all meaning of the good work that it could actually do for people. So as mayor, we can, in its current context, set the tone and bring the level down and the temperature down on that term and find ways to make meaningful progress on a topic that we still have a long way to go on.
Hayden, I'll confess I'm not a curriculum expert. The main area curriculum related that I've been focused on, done research on, is how reading is taught. And there was a fad that went through American education for a couple decades called whole language, or balanced literacy is how they've tried to rename it to hide the fact it doesn't teach kids to read. It's been an educational catastrophe. Thank goodness the last few years, they're finally trying to uproot it in the New York City school system, but it takes time. And that would be my main priority on the curriculum. Beyond that, I loved your answer, Deirdre, and I hope if I'm elected mayor, you would help me implement some of the things you talked about. One of the other things you said, just a quick pivot to something that's on my mind, is you talked about the shortage of special ed teachers. And one of the reasons there's a shortage is because the union contract mandates lockstep pay, union solidarity, et cetera, but it screws kids. If Joel Klein told me years ago, and it's still the same today, he said, if I have an opening for an English teacher and a bilingual special ed teacher, it pays the exact same based on certificates and seniority, but that's it. And the problem is he says, I get 40 applicants for the English teacher job and 0 applicants for the special ed, bilingual special ed job, or the physics teacher. There are teacher shortages in STEM, ELL, and bilingual special ed in particular. Well, you should pay them more, duh. But the union contract prohibits that. Let me give you another area of teacher shortage, high needs schools. Joel Klein again said, I have an opening at a school in this neighborhood or in the South Bronx. It's the exact same pay, but it's a much harder job in a high needs school, but it's the same pay. So I got 40 applicants here and 0 up there. So poor kids get shafted, right? There should be higher pay. So I'm going to do battle with the teachers union to get rid of this lockstep pay. And the DOE is competing in the private sector. It's competing with private schools for talent. And you want to attract and retain talent, you better have variable pay. Duh. The other thing I'll go to battle with the teachers union on is giving my school leaders control over their schools. It's the hardest job in the world to run a public school and deliver great education to all kids. And then you have a teacher union contract that says somebody with seniority can just come in and bump out maybe a key member of your team just because they have a few years of seniority. And the last way the system and the teacher union contract screws kids is Joel Klein told me. I got my teachers, we have a great teacher workforce. Teachers are the key to this system. But I'm going to let you in on a little secret. 5% of teachers are in the bottom 5%. Teaching is really hard. Not everybody's cut out for it. People get burned out. And those teachers are not doing right by kids. So he's like, well, short of conviction, not indictment for a major felony, I cannot get rid of 5,000 teachers in the system that are not getting the job done for kids. And I can't get rid of them short of the union will grieve everything, even after conviction. So he's like, I got to put them somewhere. Where am I going to put them? Can't put them in any school in this neighborhood because the parents give a lot of money to politicians and they know somebody at the New York Times. They'll raise a big stink. So where those teachers go, they go into the South Bronx, and other schools serving low-income minority kids are getting the short end of the stick.
Thank you. I will now turn it back to David Adams.
Thank you. Please give a round of applause to our students. And I just want to shout out English Chung. She is a principal for UAAMS. These are her students. And I also want to note that these students wrote those questions. Those were not our questions. We refined them a little bit, but these were student questions with regards to candidates. So thank you to our candidates for responding to the question. I certainly thank you, Hayden and Adrian, for coming up with some great questions for our folks here today. I'm going to move from our student questions to some audience questions, starting with Collin. Looking across the last several administrations, what do you see as education wins in each that should be built on? And what do you see as negative activities that should be stopped? What could we learn from those? 1 minute, Collin, starting with you.
As chaotic as it may have been, the COVID-19 pandemic, I think, exposed a lot of areas that we can focus on. And it kind of peeled back some of the things that were happening with students already, particularly around social and emotional health, and maybe, if not exacerbated it, at least made those things clear and brought it into focus. And I think that has allowed us an opportunity to kind of reset. Like, where do we go from here, right? Now that we're coming out of that, what does education look like moving forward? And obviously some of the major challenges that we've already discussed, I think it's just the inconsistency at the top with leadership, knowing that every single person that comes in is coming in with a different vision or different priority. And then that comes directly from the mayor's office, right? Who should have the competencies to hire people who are going to execute the job for the duration of the administration.
So from Collin, we have social emotional learning as a positive and inconsistency from the mayor's office as a negative. Moving over to Whitney.
On the negative side, weak mayors since Mayor Bloomberg haven't used the authority that they have and need to use, and have been beholden to special interests. And we've seen the direction the city has gone, and it's evident everywhere, especially in the test scores. I would also cite the failure to reopen schools quickly after the pandemic. There was enormous damage done to students, and there was a high educational price, a high political price that we in blue states paid for failing to reopen our schools. It was really hurting kids, and parents knew it and voted accordingly, sadly, as a lifelong Democrat.
Positives.
I would huge shout out to Mayor de Blasio for universal pre-K. That was a major accomplishment. And I would actually say 70% of children's brain development occurs in the first 3 years. I'm not sure if it should be universal or maybe it's means tested, depending on the cost, but see if we can actually extend that to capture kids even younger, because it's necessary.
Not opening schools, mayoral control not using its power to do what needs to be done. On the positives, universal 3K. Over to you, Deb.
Okay, I'll start with the positives. On the positives, I really like the fact that David Banks tried to deal with phonics in an innovative way, and I thought that was terrific. And we have seen some improvement in the public schools with respect to test scores, but I think the key innovation in the last 20 years is charter schools. I think parent choice is super important. I think that it is pro-democratic. I believe that we need to expand them and try to work out circumstances so that the public school system and the charter school system can work together and not constantly be at war. And on the negatives, I hate to repeat other people's, but I do agree that we did a crappy job on reopening schools during COVID, and I think that we've done a terrible job on bullying. I think that there was a brief reprieve when DOE settled that lawsuit and revamped the system, and the numbers came down a little bit, and as soon as the settlement was over, the numbers started going back up. But it's a chronic problem, and we have to figure out a better way to deal with bullies, because it's just not right that the victim has to ask for a safety transfer, but the bully gets to stay in the school. I believe in restorative justice. I really do.
Thank you very much. We had some really good senses from you in terms of reopening schools. We need to do better. Charter schools expand parent choice. DJ, over to you. 1 minute, please.
I will emphasize that, as an educator, we don't choose the kids we teach. We teach the kids we get. So we have no choice compared to maybe charter schools who might decide that they don't belong there because they can't meet their assessments. So when it comes down to the innovations, I think that I will start with a negative because I want to end on a positive note. I think we should keep it positive. But with a negative, my school was the first school where the first public school teacher died in the system because of the negligence of the mayor and the governor. So when it comes down to that lived experience, the students were so affected, not just the teachers, but the students. They lost their teacher. And guess what? That job was open right after. And that was not fair on behalf of all New York City teachers and all 800,000 students in the system. So for us to really talk about teachers in a negative way is totally disrespectful. But on a positive note, I'll just end really quickly. I do appreciate the multisensory learning when it comes to that shift in reading. And I do appreciate 3K, like you did say, Whitney. I will admit that. But thank you.
Thank you. So the final moments of this conversation, we're getting a little spicy, which I appreciate, right? We have different opinions. We have different understandings around the future of public education. That is why when I appreciate what Jim is saying, he's straightforward, right? I'm not going to lie to you today and then tell you the truth tomorrow or vice versa. So these are our candidates, and I'm going to turn it over to you guys for your closing statements. After that, Misha will give the closing statement. So starting with you, Deirdre, closing statement, innovation in public education. Over to you.
Again, I'm grateful. It's the first time I'm meeting all of you. And, I think it's brave of all of us to be here on this stage today. And I think that we all have great perspectives on education. So thank you. But as a born and raised New Yorker, at the end of the day, I am spicy because I do care about my students. And, I want what's best for them. And we need a leader that's going to fight for them, because we've seen so many inequities in education because we don't have that lived experience in our electeds, maybe some electeds, but we've never seen a mayor who was a teacher, unless I'm wrong. But we really do need to make sure that we have people who really do care about the 800,000 students in the New York City public school system. So again, my name is Deirdre Levy, and I thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you, Deirdre.
I became an educator because I believe in students, not in systems. And I've spent my last 10 years in my career doing everything from, as I mentioned, working in Tanzania, bringing HIV/AIDS education to schools and villages, and the AmeriCorps National Teaching Fellow, and then as a teacher and principal in New York City, and then a strategic advisor to public school districts and their superintendents across the country, helping formulate strategic improvement plans and equitable strategies for practice. I think that so much of the challenges we see in our city, globally, can be traced right back to students not getting the equitable education that they deserve, right? Issues around homelessness, issues around safety, issues around economic mobility all start in our schools. And we have damn good people working in our schools who are doing their level best, but the system and structure really is working against them. Thank you.
Folks, if I were to summarize the system we have, you only need to tell me two things. I'll tell you the quality of public school a kid gets: color of their skin and their zip code. It's true in New York. It's true around this country. It is deeply wrong. I've been fighting against that to rectify that system for my entire adult life. The only hope to changing this system and doing right by kids who most need the best teachers and the best schools to escape the poverty they were born into, so that demography is not destiny, is a very strong mayor who is independent of a bloated and corrupt system that is beholden to special interests. I am the only person in this race who is not a career politician, who, if I'm elected, I will not owe anything to anyone and will solely be fighting for the people of New York, especially the children of New York. So I hope you will vote for me. Thank you.
So I'm going to end this on a personal note. I'm just going to tell you a very brief story. So I told you a little bit about my background, and I can tell you about my vision for the schools of the city of New York and who's going to be the chancellor and how we're going to do it. But at the end of the day, that will fall away to the reason that I'm doing this, right? Because the reason that I'm doing it is authentic and real, and I feel it every day, right? So I said before, I was that kid. But when I say that I could have been in District 75, let me unpack that a little bit. The person that made the difference in my life was a fellow named Mr. Louis Volpe. And Mr. Volpe was my teacher. And my teacher saw something that the entire system failed to see, which is that I had a brain in my head. And I went from someone that literally the system had characterized as being learning disabled into an advanced placement class when I was a junior in high school. And so I had 2 years of specialized attention on me. And in that 2 years, I think that that's where I got whatever grit I was able to muster out of that system. And that experience leads me to two conclusions that are going to drive the tone from the top that I set, which is that whatever we do, it has to be the thing that is not politically expedient. It's the thing that protects kids from having to deal with what I had to deal with, which I was white at least. If it was a black kid in that school or some other ethnicity, I would have had it even worse. I might not have even gotten any attention. So that's number one. And number two, the teachers matter. And so when I set policy, it is not going to be the white guy dictating to a system of brilliant people who have been living this experience. It's going to be based on input from experts like you who should be controlling the Department of Education in the long term.
Right before we hear from the last candidate who wasn't able to make it today, I do want to thank everybody who came on stage today. These folks have very busy schedules. As the potential next mayor of New York, they have to have a lot of policy chops across a lot of different things, from sanitation to making sure the snow gets collected, right? So to the extent that they came here today to present their vision on public education, and to the extent that you guys came out to hear it, that's because we all have a common future in public education, and we are all dedicated to making that better for all of our kids. So just say thank you to our folks here. Thank you to our students. And we have a special message from one of our candidates who was not able to make it in terms of his closing statements, Michael Blake.
Good evening to all the young, bright minds of New York City. My name is Michael Blake. I'm a candidate for mayor, and I'm doing this because we have to change the game. We have to let people know that we deserve better. We deserve the best because we're New Yorkers. You're not merely just the promise of the future. You are the present. You are the ones that are the lifeblood of our city. See, I'm that kid that went to PS 79, 118, DeWitt Clinton High School. So education is essential for me. That's the reason I talk often, as you hear the trains behind me, you already know that's what time it is right now. I talk often about how we go from civics to financial literacy to mental health, because if we do all those things, we help you to be a better student, but also better at life. That's what we want to make sure. You're committed to social justice. You're driven by a desire to make difference in our community. You are here regulated to remind people that we can do things better and greater. We can have a My Brother's Keeper program that, as I did when I worked for President Obama. And I want to remind people that your block won't block your blessing and your zip code won't deny your destiny. This is the vision of what we can have when we think about how it's not just the cornerstone of how we can do things well every single day. It's about being the cornerstone for democracy. That's why we need you in this game. Why am I running for mayor in New York City? Because when you think about how government can make life better, that's what you're doing through urban assembly, and that's what happens with all of our communities at once. So it doesn't matter if you're from the Bronx or Brooklyn, no, if you're in Southeast Queens or in El Barrio, or if you're on Staten Island, we can all do this and win together. That is the vision. So this commitment is a wholehearted approach on what we got to do around education. First and foremost, on day one, same way I'm talking about declaring an emergency around cost of living, affordability, and public services. It means we have to be serious about a charter revision commission so that we can ensure that we have high quality education across the city. That's how you make it serious, that you put it into the charter and make it very clear, this is my priority, not just some casual conversation. This action would codify our investment in education. So then you're not worried about who's going to do it down the line. It's there, it's written, it's law, and we can move forward. It makes us all accountable, makes us all responsible. It shows that we are serious about this. I want a city that allows us all to be making sure that your voices are heard every single day. Too often the people are not a part of the process. And we got to be real clear at the end of the day that government is here for the people from the moment you're born to the moment you get called on home. So civic engagement is a part of this, but clearly it's part of our education system. So if you want to be a part of a vision of going from the cradle to the career, then join us. If you believe that education doesn't just end after graduating from urban assembly, but it continues for your life journey, join us. If you recognize that it's not just about passing a test, but transforming your life, then join us. I further would expand all the proposals we laid out for CUNY so that there's apprenticeship and trade programs for tax credits so that you actually have a chance for student loan forgiveness to help our communities to pursue the lives you want. You shouldn't be denied at what you want to achieve in your life just because you couldn't afford it right there. Together, we can possess a vision and a dream to make things even better. Together, we can and will make New York City better because of all that's happening. So to Urban Assembly and to everyone in the city right now, if you understand that we deserve better, we deserve the best, my name is Michael Blake, and I'm asking you to be the mayor of New York City because tomorrow begins today. Join us at blakefornyc.com.
So I have the unique pleasure of closing us out. I also have the unique pleasure of probably being the only person in this room who's had every job in New York City Public School. And that includes your job, which is being a student and a graduate of New York City Public Schools. And so from student to chancellor, I want to say to you all, first of all, thank you so much for being brave enough to take on this moment for our city because we need it. I also want to say it is really important to know who this room is. And this is a room of folks who believe in New York City Public Schools. And I want to be 100% clear because it's my job to close this out, and I don't work for nobody. School choice doesn't start at a charter door. School choice starts across every single public school. And when I say public school, I include New York City public schools. I include our charter public schools. Public schools and choice start at the door of every single school in New York City. And so I want our candidates to remember, when you look at this room, you don't even have to go crazy building policies, because what good teachers know is the answer's in the room. And the answer is in this room with these people who are deeply committed to public education and ensuring every single kid, regardless of their zip code, has an amazing education. I also want to say to you, I want to challenge us to redefine what good school is. I also got to lead a school in the South Bronx where we did amazing work and graduated amazing, beautiful young people who are doing great things in the world. And so I want us to recognize that while we sit in a moment where, yes, our city is deeply segregated, our neighborhoods are deeply segregated, our socioeconomic groups are deeply segregated, but I can tell you, you can go to Brooklyn and you can find an amazing school regardless of the zip code. You can go to the boogie down Bronx and you can find an amazing school. I don't know if you heard these amazing young people, but they go to school in the Bronx. I'm a little partial. Everybody knows that. They came up with the questions because that's what's important to young people. And I think the only thing, we centered young people's voices and questions, but I think the only thing I would challenge our candidates to do is to ensure that students are a critical part of the conversation about what New York City and what public education needs. Because they know better than anyone. They are the future. They are experiencing learning, and no one knows better post-pandemic how difficult and challenging it is to be not only a student, but an educator in New York City public schools. Finally, the most important thing, and I've been the bureaucracy, so I can talk about it really loud. There is a lot to eliminate. I will tell you, having been chancellor, the most important thing that happens in our schools happens in classrooms between our babies and our teachers, and our principals create the conditions for that to happen effectively and efficiently. I heard you talk about your principal with a smile, so that brought joy to my heart, because you could have been talking a different way. But it is really important that we remember that and keep that at the center of every decision that is made. Every time we make a decision in New York City for New York City public schools, regardless of who becomes the mayor, it has to be, how is this decision going to land in a classroom between our babies and their teachers? And I heard you all talk about shifting the structures of the system, the reading agenda, which is so important to continue for New York City. But I want to remind you of what Hayden talked about, which is the identity of our young people and it being represented in the curriculum and experiences they have in school. Do not let Washington take that away from New York City, because we've done it exceptionally well. And I ain't running for nothing. And so I want to just end with where we started. No matter who the next mayor is, our commitment, the collective commitment of this room, remains the same. And that is supporting our schools, our educators, and our families to build a stronger and more equitable system. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for listening to our latest episode of Innovations in Education, where we bring education leaders who have made things work in the education sector. If you like this episode, please subscribe so that you can hear more great content around innovations in education. I've been your host, David Adams, and have a great day.